tell you all the truth, I just love the Bible. I do. I read it for fun. Well, not fun necessarily, you know, but I enjoy it. And I don't just read it when I'm preparing for my sermon. I read it along and stuff like that. And of course, every once in a while, you know, you get something you start thinking and you go, that's really something. And we call it the Holy Bible, don't we? Now, I'm sure that y'all gonna understand that what I say here is probably blasphemy. There ain't nothing holy about this thing I'm holding up here. It's just paper and leather and some ribbon. That's not what's holy. What's holy about the Bible is that it takes us wherever we are and whoever we are, and it leads us to encounter that which is truly holy, God. If we want to know what is God like, or who is God, and how does God behave, you get it here. In 597 BC, which was a while even before I was born, the Babylonians invaded the kingdom of Judah and conquered it and captured its people and took what would have been called the cream of society, you know, the business leaders, the politicians, the rulers, the intelligentsia and stuff like that, and hauled them off to Babylon. And they didn't do it in a nice way. They put a fish hook in their earlobe and took that fish hook and tied it to a central line and frog marched them all the way up the coast and then over and then back down, because you can't go that way unless you got just tons and tons of water, and they didn't have a way of having tons and tons of water. And then they resettled them there and said, make this your home, this is where you are, and you're not going nowhere else. And it was then that these people from the land of Judah had their first real crisis. Not from being defeated, not from being captured, not from being marched away, but being settled and being told, this is your home. Make a life. And they wondered, how do we make a life? How do we keep in contact with our God? How do we remain a people who are dedicated to God, who are God's chosen people, without losing all of our young folks as they marry kids from other ethnic groups and we just lose our identity? How are we going to be God's people when there is no temple? There's no other thing where we worship, and we just don't know how we're going to survive and continue to be people of God. Now that's the start of the story of the people in Babylon, but it's not the start of the story of the people. We can go back and we can see when God calls Abraham, that's about 2000 BC. When God calls Moses, that's about 1200 BC. And now we're 700 years later, roughly. And there is this crisis of identity and of faith. They wonder, is God, the God we have worshipped, still our God? Or have we been abandoned? Or have we worshipped something that didn't really exist all these thousands of years? Then we get to the second chapter of Ezekiel. In those first 5 verses, which amount to pretty much God's call to Ezekiel to be his prophet and speak the words of God to the people that are living there in the environs of Babylon. And God doesn't whitewash the past. He says, these are stubborn, filled with faults. They can't be constant. They don't always keep their attention on me. They've gone away and followed other gods from time to time. But I am calling you to take my words to them. And whether they listen or whether they don't listen, this much will be true. They will know that a prophet of God has been among them. They will know that a prophet of God has been among them. Now we know, because we're not living at that time, but the time we are, that in about 70 years from that event, the Persians, under the king Cyrus, are going to conquer Babylon. And after all the dust is settled and they've set up their administration, King Cyrus puts out an edict and says, you Jewish folk, y'all can go home. Reestablish your kingdom, have your rulers, have your customs, build your temple, do whatever it is that you want to do, as long as you pay the tax. That's it. The Persians had created a kind of empire that had never before been seen in that part of the world. Because previous to that, the Egyptians and the Assyrians and all the others, they would haul you off so that you couldn't stay where what was familiar, and you would fade away, and they didn't have to worry about you revolting. But the person said, well, you know, if we let these people rule themselves, keep their customs, worship their same gods, and don't interfere too much with their daily life, as long as they pay tax, we won't have any trouble at all. And generally speaking, they did. The Persians were known as benevolent conquerors. Now, if you revolted, they could be pretty nasty, but they didn't have a whole lot of that. And one of the things that happens because there is a prophet there in Babylon to speak to the Jews, they create this new institution so that they can maintain their worship of God. We call it synagogue. It didn't exist when they went into exile, but they carried it home with them. And soon, after the return, every village had its own synagogue. And it looked a lot like this. Except the truth is that they didn't copy us, we copied them. That's the honest truth. You know, it was a revelation for me. I can't remember how many years ago it was, but it was a bunch of years ago. I wound up at Synod Assembly, and we had a tour I could go on, and we went to a Jewish synagogue, and you know, there was a couple of places here and there where what we have, they don't have, they have something else that's more appropriate to them. But it looked like this. It looked just like this. Their service like this. You know, it's interesting, you know, you can go into a Lutheran church, into a Presbyterian, not Presbyterian, excuse me, into an Episcopal church, you can go into a Roman Catholic church, you can go into an Eastern Orthodox church. And there will be some things that are a little unfamiliar, but some things that are, and even the service is going to look pretty much like this with God. Wording a little differently here and there, but you would recognize it. You wouldn't feel like you were lost and didn't know what was going on. It all goes back to Ezekiel in Babylon. God called Ezekiel to be a prophet, to be there among those people who have arrived in Babylon as captives, who are facing what is for them a completely uncertain future, where even their existence as a people is questioned, because we remember 200 years or so before this, the northern kingdom of Israel was conquered, and those people were carried away by the Assyrians, and they vanished into history. They're lost. They lost their language, they lost their culture, they lost their identity, they lost their faith. It became mingled with all the rest of the people that lived in the Assyrian Empire. So these people that are there in Babylon, they know the risk. They know the story. They know what can happen. But God sends a prophet. And they survive. And they prosper. And one day, they're able to return. Jesus, we're told, goes back to his hometown. Now, in Mark, that gets a little iffy, which we're talking about. I'm going to say it's Nazareth. But if you read a little earlier in Mark, you know he owns a house in Capernaum, so it could have been back in Capernaum, which it doesn't tell us here which one it is. But we read, since it said hometown, we're going to assume it goes back to Nazareth, and it comes up on a Saturday, which is when they worship. And he goes in and he begins to teach. And people are going, wow, what is this? What is this teaching? Because one of the things Jesus does that's different than what they're used to, he says, this is what this text is talking to you about. They weren't used to hearing that when they went in and had worship, and the rabbi was leading worship and giving the teaching. Because they were used to hearing the rabbi say, now, rabbi, this such and so at this point in time, and then this rabbi and this rabbi said all these things, and so we can know from that that now this is the truth of God's word here today. It had to be grounded in what other rabbis had said previously. They even collected all of that and put together in a volume of books. It's called the Talmud. But Jesus wasn't doing that. He wasn't saying, well, this rabbi said this, and this other rabbi over here that said this, and then this one said this, so now I'm going to say this. He was just teaching with authority, and that's what that authority means. He's not basing what he's teaching on what other rabbis have said previously. And they're amazed. It's wonderful. They can't believe what they're hearing. It's so concise and clear and meaningful. And then, you knew there had to be an and then, didn't you? And then, they look up and they see Jesus and they say, we know him, he grew up here. We know his brothers and his sisters, they're here in the congregation with us today. Who is he to be telling us this stuff? He's just no better than any of the rest of us. It's the truth, you know, and I'm going to tell you all this is a secret. Well, it's not a secret, but one of the things that almost never happens is that when somebody grows up and decides to become a pastor, they don't go back to the church they grew up in. And there's a reason. And that reason right here in chapter 6. Because people have to, we remember what he was like when he was growing up. And you know, the truth is, all of us have got some of those moments that we did stuff that, you know, and people are going to look at us and say, what's he doing standing up there? I probably got a couple of those tucked up behind me somewhere too. They couldn't get past the familiarity. And Jesus, we understand, then, is limited in what he can do there. But then he calls his disciples together, 2 by 2, and sends them out. And he said, you take your staff, no bread, no extra tunic in case it gets cold at night, you're having to sleep on the ground on the way, no money, nothing extra. Just go wherever you go, stay wherever anybody invites you to stay. And be content with what that has. You don't be looking to, get a little improvement up. Once upon a time, a long time ago, I was flying home from Denver, Colorado, back to Charleston. I'd been out there for my aunt's funeral and was coming back home, and I was flying to Charleston because Stephanie was still down there with her parents. We were going to be on vacation down there. And when we came in, y'all know that this doesn't matter if you're going to heaven or hell when you die, you got a 2-hour layover in Atlanta. So we would come back into Atlanta and then continue on to Charleston. And when that pilot set that big old airplane down, I found out what it was like to be in a plane that's landing on aircraft carrier. That thing, he slammed that thing down. And so when we offloaded and put a few people on, he said, y'all all move up to the first, I can't even remember what it's called, first class. And we're going to give y'all a treat because we had such a bad landing there. We're not going to make you sit back there in the back like we do. They got upgraded. People were looking for that. And he says, don't take an upgrade. Wherever you stay, stay. If you come to a village and the people don't want anything to do, you shake the dirt off your feet against them. This is a real thing. It's just not a metaphor or something like that. But it is a prophetic move that if you are not accepted, you stand there at the village boundary, just before you step out of the village and into the road to the next one, and you pull up in front of your road, and you lift your foot up, and you shake the sand off of it as a mark against that village that they have not received God's message. That was a real thing. That they had been in the presence of the holy, and that the holy was now removed from them. We come here each week to be in the presence of the holy. To be with God that comes to us through the words that are written on this page. The composition of the whole Bible, the way it's put together, is really remarkable. It's the most amazing document in the history of humankind. There are so many contributors, we can't even name them all. If you look at the first 5 books, we say there's 4 main authors. There's the guy we call the Yahwist, the guy we call the Elohist, the guy we call the Deuteronomist, and the guy we call the priestly writers. And then there is R to the infinity. R stands for redactor. That's a kind of an editor who took these 4 separate traditions and wove them together into one coherent whole. And that occurs over and over and over again. The people who write the Bible are the field sounds like a nice church phrase. I think I'll use that. They are writing with a purpose. And that is so that through what they write, the stories they tell, the histories they reveal to us, we will understand just who God is and what relationship God desires to have with us. They are revelators of that which is holy for us. And we see today clearly two very specific ways that holiness comes through Ezekiel, Jesus and his disciples. That God is revealed in how we live and how we say and what attitude we take. Those people that are there in that synagogue on that Sabbath day in Nazareth who say, "Who does he think he is?" They don't say it quite that way, but that's what they mean. His brothers were here, his sisters were here. We know his family watched him grow up. Where does he get this authority? And when they do that, they have removed themselves from the presence of that which is holy and enriches their lives. And I got to tell you, they didn't have to work at feeling that way. It was pretty easy. It came to them naturally. It's sometimes who we are. We aren't paying attention to what we're doing, and we remove ourselves from the holy. But God never gives up on us. There is always that Ezekiel. There is always that follower of Jesus who's out there with that, walking on those lonely roads, going from village to village to let people know who Jesus is. There is always the message for us. There is always the chance of being there and being wrapped with the holy. And in that, live that holy life that leads to life eternal.